Imagine you've spent the last 20 or 30 years building wealth through real estate, right? You've taken all these risks, you've managed tenants, dealt with maintenance, you've navigated these market cycles, and now you've decided it's time to sell. Then someone tells you once you close, the IRS gives you just 45 days to identify your next investment, or you could owe hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars in taxes. What happens, you guys? Most investors panic. They rush into buying something they don't really want simply because the clock is ticking. Today, I want to show you there's another way. Welcome back to Keeping It Real Estate. I'm Dan Breezy, and today we're talking about one of the most powerful wealth building tools available to real estate investors, and that's the 1031 exchange. But this isn't going to be a tax lecture, you guys. We're going to talk about how sophisticated investors use 1031 exchanges strategically so they can preserve their wealth and create passive income, thereby diversifying into strong assets, and that avoids making these rushed investment decisions. So if you're selling investment real estate this year, or even if you're just thinking about it, this episode could save you hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, and help you make a much better investment decision. So let's dive in. So here's why this matters, you guys. I believe the biggest mistake investors make isn't paying taxes. The biggest mistake is buying the wrong property simply because they don't want to pay taxes. So we've watched investors purchase properties they never would have considered under normal circumstances, simply because they had 10 days left on their identification period, or they're selling at the peak of the market in 2021. The pressure, it actually becomes very enormous. And instead of asking, is this the best investment? They're asking, can I close before my deadline? Those are two completely different questions, you guys. Our goal today is really to help you make decisions from a position of strength and not from a position of urgency. So by the end of today's episode, you'll understand how a 1031 exchange works. You're going to understand the timelines you absolutely need to know. You're going to know the biggest mistakes investors make and why investors are choosing passive ownership. Also, how tenants in common or the TIC structure works. We're also going to go through questions we hear every week from investors considering a 1031 exchange. Let's start off with the basics so no one's left behind. What is a 1031 exchange? At its core, a 1031 exchange just allows investors to defer capital gains when they sell one investment property and then reinvest those proceeds into another qualifying investment property. Notice I said defer taxes, you guys. It's not eliminate them. The benefit is that instead of sending a large portion of your proceeds to the IRS today, you're able to keep more of it, keep that capital invested working for you. And that larger pool of capital can obviously generate additional income and larger income and larger appreciation and wealth for you and your family. For many investors, that's one of the most powerful aspects of the entire strategy. Now, here's the thing, the timeline you must know, you guys. Every investor should know 4 key rules. Rule number 1 is you got to work with a qualified intermediary. You can't receive the sale proceeds yourself. A qualified intermediary holds the funds during the exchange. Rule number 2, there's a 45-day identification period. You have just 45 days after closing to identify your replacement properties. And this deadline is strict. There are very few exceptions. Rule number 3 is you've got the 180-day exchange period. So you generally have 180 days from the sale of your relinquished property to complete the purchase of your replacement property. Rule number 4, it has to be a like-kind property. Fortunately, like-kind is broader than, most people think. Many types of investment real estate can qualify, but you should always work with a qualified intermediary or a QI and your tax advisor to confirm eligibility. And one of the biggest pieces of advice we give investors, start planning before your property ever goes under contract. Planning creates options, right? Waiting creates pressure, and you do not want pressure when investing capital. The biggest mistake we see, the number 1 mistake, is waiting too long. The earlier you start planning, the more opportunities you have. Don't wait until your property is sold. Don't wait until day 30 of your identification period. You guys should be starting months before closing. And mistake number 2 is thinking you have to buy another property yourself. This is probably the single biggest misconception we hear. Many investors, they just assume they have to go buy another warehouse, right? Another office building, another apartment complex, or retail center on their own. The reality is today's market offers many more options than that. Mistake number 3 is letting the tax tail wag the investment dog. Ask yourself, you guys, one question. If I wasn't completing a 1031 exchange, would I still buy this property? And if the answer is no, take a step back. Avoiding taxes should never be the only reason to make an investment, you guys. I wish we would have hammered that point home much harder from 2019 through 2022. So many people were investing for taxes instead of was this a good deal? Your replacement property options, you guys, real simple. Most investors think they only have one option, buy another property. But today, there are several paths depending on your goals. Option 1 is buy another property yourself. The pros to that is you have complete control. You have the ability to force appreciation. You have direct ownership. Some of the cons is that you have to have property management, maintenance, vacancies, unexpected repairs, potentially concentration risk, right? More work. Option 2 is tenants in common, or a TIC, which is basically for many investors who are looking to become more passive. A TIC structure can be an attractive solution here. Instead of purchasing an entire property yourself, you own a proportional interest in a much larger institutional quality asset alongside other investors. The benefits of that may include that you've got professional asset management, right? You got geographic diversification. You have access to larger assets. You've got economies of scale. You've got reduced day-to-day responsibilities. You got potential cash distributions and the ability to invest in markets you may not otherwise access. At Granite Towers, we've actually structured TIC investments in multifamily communities and select net lease opportunities for our investors looking to defer taxes, while transitioning into a much more passive ownership role. So that is an option. Here's a case study that we've done, you guys. So from an industrial property to a passive income, one investor, he came to us after deciding to sell a medium-sized industrial building. And like many owners, the property had served him really well for years, but it also came with the responsibilities of active ownership, right? He had maintenance, leases, negotiations, capital expenditures, and just the pressure of finding another property before his 1031 deadline. So together, we explored his options, and rather than rushing into purchasing, another property on his own, he completed a 1031 exchange into 2 net lease properties. And those properties are leased to a nationally recognized dental provider with more than 500 locations, and both have lease terms exceeding 15 years with built-in annual rent increases. So today, those investments are performing in line with expectations. They're producing consistent monthly cash flow, and we at Granite Towers oversee the remaining landlord responsibilities for him. And most importantly, he was able to defer millions of dollars in taxes while transitioning into a significantly more passive ownership experience. Story number 2, we're talking about trading active management for institutional ownership. So another investor sold a multifamily property, and he loved real estate. He simply didn't want another operational headache. So instead of purchasing another apartment building, himself, he completed a 1031 exchange into one of our multifamily investments using a tenant in common structure, or a TIC structure. And that exchange deferred approximately $1 to $1.5 million in taxes. And today, he's an owner in approximately a $40 million apartment community. He receives quarterly distributions as the property performs. And while our team, it handles the renovations, handles the leasing, the maintenance, financing, and the day-to-day operations. And then story number 3, we just closed on a deal called Hathaway at Willow Bend in Plano, Texas. And that investor sold a commercial property and reinvested a portion of those proceeds into our Hathaway at Willow Bend community in Plano, Texas. It's a 229-unit apartment community, and it's in one of the strongest locations in Dallas. It's the submarket of Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. And rather than buying another standalone property, they became a passive owner in an institutional quality asset alongside other investors through a TIC structure. So instead of managing another property by themselves, they now participate in the ownership of a professionally managed apartment community. Some of the questions we hear every week, you guys, is what if I want to control the property? That's probably the first question we hear. Some investors, they genuinely enjoy managing properties, right? They like to find the deals. They like to negotiate the leases. They like making every decision. If that's you, a TIC investment is probably not the right fit, and that's okay. But many investors usually reach a point where they ask themselves, do I really want another job? And they still love owning real estate. They just don't want to be managing it on the day-to-day anymore. And for those investors, passive ownership can be an excellent solution. Another question we get is, what if I don't have enough equity? Another common misconception is that many investors think they need $5 or $10 million to invest in institutional quality real estate. And that's just not the case. Through a tenant in common structure, or again, a TIC structure, investors can own a proportional interest in a much larger property alongside other investors. So instead of needing enough capital to buy a $40 million apartment community all by yourself, you may be able to own a meaningful interest in that asset while sharing ownership with other investors. Another question is, how does the financing work? So every investment is structured differently, but generally speaking, financing is arranged at the property level, and our team manages the lender relationships, all the loan servicing, any of the refinancing decisions, all the reporting, and ongoing asset management. And typically, we're able to work around having you sign on the loan. So you aren't personally liable for the loan dollars, which is a huge plus. Instead of arranging financing yourself, you're investing alongside a professional management team that oversees those responsibilities, and we sign on the loan. And as always, investors should review each offering very carefully and consult with their legal and tax advisors. Another question is, what are the risks? First of all, every investment has risks, period. There isn't a single real estate investment that comes without them. And that goes the same with leaving cash in the bank for too long. There's also a risk there, with inflation slowly eating it away. But some of the risks in real estate include market risks, interest rate risks, occupancy risk, tenant risk, capital expenditure risk, financing and refinancing risk, any economic downturns. The goal, you guys, is not to eliminate the risk. The goal is to make thoughtful investment decisions where the potential return appropriately compensates for the risks being taken. And that's why our team spends a significant amount of time evaluating cycles, markets, demographics, debt structure, tenant quality, business plans, and downside protections before we ever acquire an asset. Another question is, how do I know if a TIC is right for me? Ask yourself these 5 questions, you guys. Number 1, am I tired of managing property? Number 2, would I rather spend my time with family more than dealing with tenants and contractors? Number 3, do I want access to larger institutional quality assets? Number 4, would professional management improve my lifestyle? And number 5, would I rather choose my next investment because it's the best opportunity, not because the IRS gave me 45 days? If you answered yes, to several of those questions, it's probably worth at least exploring whether a TIC structure aligns with your goals. What makes a great replacement property? So before identifying a replacement property, ask yourself, would I buy this property if I wasn't in a 1031 exchange? If the answer is no, don't let the tax tail wag the investment dog. A great replacement property should offer you several things: a strong market fundamentals, you've got durable cash flow, you've got high quality tenants or residents, you've got a sensible leverage, experienced management, a clear business plan, multiple exit strategies. Those are the characteristics that really build wealth over time in real estate. In closing, you guys, if you're thinking about selling investment real estate this year or even next year, don't wait until you're inside your 45-day identification period to start exploring your options here. The earlier you begin planning, the more flexibility you're going to have and the better decisions you're going to be able to make. So if you'd like to discuss your specific situation, we'd be happy to schedule a complimentary 1031 strategy call with our team, and we'll walk through your goals, right? We'll discuss the potential replacement property options and help you think through your exchange strategy before deadlines create these unnecessary pressures. We've also created a free 1031 exchange guide and timeline checklist that outlines the process, key deadlines and common mistakes to avoid. And you can download it using the link in the show notes. I'm going to leave you with one final thought, you guys. The best 1031 exchange isn't the one that avoids the most taxes. It's the one that puts you in a stronger financial position 5, 10, or 20 years from now. Taxes do matter, but the quality of your next investment matters even more. Thanks so much for joining us today. If you found this episode valuable, you guys, please subscribe, leave us a review and share it with someone who's considering selling investment real estate. And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Keeping It Real Estate.